OK, Cami, what do we need to know? The OECD has released its quarterly report, the first since Donald Trump imposed tariffs. What's the news?
It's not great. It was the first attempt by global economists to document potential damage from Trump's recent policies. The OECD, which is a group of 38 mostly wealthy nations, has made new economic forecasts that are a lot worse than its previous predictions, cutting both US and global economic outlooks. Global GDP growth is now projected to go from 3.2% in 2024 to 3% in 2026. In its December projections, the OECD had put that estimate at 3.3% for this year and the next. The report also predicts that US economic growth would slow dramatically to 2.2% in 2025 and just 1.6% the following year. Inflation is still expected to cool, but at a much slower rate than previously forecast. The OECD Secretary General blames this bleaker outlook on uncertainty around trade.
The high policy and geopolitical uncertainty at present brings with it significant risks to these baseline projections. One risk is further trade fragmentation. A trade fragmentation could result in lower growth and higher inflation by discouraging business investment and increasing costs for production inputs and for consumption.
Now, Canada and Mexico, both of which are on the receiving end of Trump's tariffs, saw their own growth outlooks slashed dramatically. The OECD believes Canada's growth will be just 0.7% this year and next, far less than the 2% prediction from December. And Mexico is now projected to shrink by 1.3%. The report shows that China, on the other hand, could be more insulated than Mexico and Canada, its government having just announced a plan to revitalise domestic consumption. China is currently facing a sluggish consumer landscape, and the plan announced Sunday aims to address long-term structural issues like wages and property and stock markets.
Special initiatives will increase policy efforts on the demand side, focusing on increasing residents' income and reducing their financial burdens, like promoting reasonable wage growth.
The US has upended global trade over the last 2 months, and as various governments look toward Washington with some trepidation over what might come next, consumers around the world have been taking matters into their own hands, many now refusing to buy American. A roundup with Luke Schrago.
A boycott of US products that's now being followed by at least half the population of Denmark, according to local media.
I thought what was happening in the United States was unfair. It was a way of speaking out, voting with your wallets.
At home, it's clear we buy fewer American goods. There are plenty, soda, McDonald's and so on.
The US saw its reputation plummet after Donald Trump forged ahead with tariffs on various imports. The effect? A global trade war with no end in sight and mounting anger at Washington. But trade isn't the only cause, with this bar in Sweden dumping American drinks over the country's new geopolitical stance.
It's become quite clear that the US government is on Russia's side. For example, voting with Russia in the UN, ending aid to Ukraine, and this disastrous meeting between the presidents.
Canada, too, in the firing line for Trump's tariffs, hasn't been slow to act, with products pulled from shelves and consumers using applications to identify their origins. Similar moves have been made elsewhere in Europe too, with social media groups calling for boycotts swelling into the tens of thousands. However, there are also fears, given the US's new unpredictability, over how it might respond.
We can see that
the Americans are acting very emotionally at this moment. So if we start annoying them by signaling that Denmark's boycotting the USA, then the risk is that they'll come back with measures more powerful in relation to what we're actually talking about by boycotting a sandwich shop.
One sign of that is how Washington said it would label those part of any violent protests against Elon Musk's Tesla in the US as domestic terrorists.
Forever 21 was once a fast fashion pioneer, but it wasn't fast enough, and now the company is filing for bankruptcy for the second time in 6 years. It said in a statement that its shops and website in the US will remain open and functional for now, but it was preparing for an orderly wind down of its business. Forever 21 was once a favourite among young women looking for trendy but cheap clothes. At its peak, it had more than 800 physical stores and $4 billion in sales. But that was almost a decade ago, and since then it's faced stiff competition from Shein and Temu, who are both cheaper and faster when it comes to adapting to fashion trends. The company had already filed for bankruptcy protection back in 2019, but a group of investors ended up buying it through a joint venture, after which it faced the COVID-19 pandemic, high inflation and competition from Chinese-founded upstarts. Not all its shops are affected by the bankruptcy. Its international stores and its websites are expected to keep operating, and the firm could still technically find a new operators willing to run the business in the US, Gavin.
Cami, thank you. Cami Nice on the business desk. Let's just bring you up to date with some information we're getting. This is